Welcome back. This is the Intel on eNCA. It's a Sunday afternoon, and we do this on a need-to-know basis because you do need to know. In our profile slot today, we're speaking to Mpho Phalatse, who is the DA mayoral candidate for the City of Johannesburg. She'll be up against the likes of ActionSA's Herman Mashaba and candidates from other political parties. She joins me now for a conversation. Thank you for coming through.
Thank you for
I didn't know that you're a bit of a rural girl. Tell me about Mpho Phalatse and Hebron.
Oh yes, yeah. I lived with my grandmother when I was a baby. I moved in with my parents. I think I was 4 years old already when I was going to grade 1. So my grandmother lived in Hebron. It's a rural village. I loved it. There was a creche there, and my parents lived in Malpani, and there was no creche close by. So by default, I stayed with my grandma, and I attended this amazing creche in Hebron. I moved in with my parents when I started school. I was 4 years old, too young to start school, but there was an agreement between my parents and the school that I would repeat grade 1. But at the end of the year, I came out on top of my class, and so they could not make me repeat, so I just carried on.
That makes you a bit of a, I don't know if you remember a series years ago called Doogie Howser MD. this marvel child, this genius, boy genius who ends up in medical school way before their time. I mean, you were a bit of an overachiever like Doogie Howser yourself.
Well, it caught up with me because I changed schools, and I think my last school in high school was like, she has to go back 2 classes to be with her peers, her age mates.
Right.
And then, again, another negotiation was entered into with my parents, and they settled on 1 year back. So I repeated Standard 7, not because I had failed, but because I was trying to be as close to my peers as possible, but I was still the youngest in my class. So, yeah, but it helped narrow the gap a bit.
I'm revealing my age, right? Talking about Doogie Howser MD.
Yes.
You even know what I'm talking about.
Yes, of course
you know
I do.
It.
Yes,
That's
yes,
serious.
yes.
So tell me about the extent to which those experiences growing up in, rural parts of South Africa, what impact did it leave with you? I mean, what did it deposit in the person that you would become?
I think a sense of community, a sense of responsibility to my fellow man, but also an understanding of different circumstances. I mean, if you look at, I lived in a village with my grandmother, then I moved into a township where I lived with my parents. Then we moved to a more suburban part of the township, and then my parents subsequently moved to a proper urban setting. So I think I've experienced different settings, and so I can connect with people from different backgrounds. I understand their lived experiences, their challenges. I understand the kind of help they need from government. I think where I am now, it makes me a very balanced person in terms of my ability to serve residents of Joburg.
Yeah. Let's ask the team to show some of the pictures that you shared. I like them, and some of them really hark back to a period when you were really, really small, like a little girl. And you can tell us about some of what we see. Some of the visuals, some of the pictures that you shared include your parents, pictures of your parents. How important an influence have they been?
I get emotional when you talk about them because, I'm an only child, and my parents are educators. They're both retired educators, even though my mom still works. She consults for Uma Lucy. She's, 69 or something. But they really were very intentional in raising me. They had an outcome in mind, and they did everything in line with that outcome. So I remember my bedroom when I moved in with my parents. It was a teaching lab. You know, everything was labeled. The wall was labeled wall. The door was labeled door. And so there was education all around me. So, yeah, they instilled in me a culture of learning. I mean, I was not allowed to sell my textbooks. So at the end of the year, when all my colleagues and my peers were selling their books for extra pocket money, I couldn't do that. You know, we had a whole library at home, and they had books from when they were in high school, which I still used. So they taught me to really value education, to value books, and to always push myself to go further. And I was just never good enough, believe it or not. And being an only child is tough because, you know, in a big family, you can maybe be the black sheep, and hopefully there'll be the blue-eyed person in the family. I had to be all of that, and it comes with a lot of pressure, but looking back, they've done me a great justice. I know that I owe a lot of who I am and what I've achieved today to those two people.
It's a pity I don't have those pictures ready, because I was hoping that we'll be showing them as we speak. One of them has to do with ballroom dancing. So as you talk about your parents, there are stories there around you and ballroom dancing. But by the way, can you still do it now?
I can, I can. I'm not doing it actively, but I can still dance, yes.
But at some point, they put their foot down, your parents, and said, absolutely not.
Yeah. You know, it was so sad because, so I was doing competitive dancing. So you start with 2 dances, then you advance, you do 3. I was doing both ballroom and Latin American because I didn't like sports. So I didn't like traditional sports.
Right.
And I had to find a way to participate in some fitness activity. And there was this club in the township where I grew up in Maopane, so I was part of that. And finally, I was going to do 5 dances, which is every dancer's dream, you know. So I was adding paso doble and I was adding the foxtrot, no, Viennese waltz to the ballroom side and paso doble to the Latin side. They paid for me to go away on a training workshop. I got my dances together. This is my standard 9 year. So at the end of standard 9, coming back, I'm thinking, yes, I'm going to start competing with the big guns. My mom said, no, young lady, it's your matric year now. You will focus on your books. I was not very happy.
I can imagine. I can imagine, but it served you well. But there's a period in which you were taking a path other than the path that you eventually would take, the path of medicine. What was happening there? I mean, I know, for instance, that when I was growing up, I would say to my teachers, I want to be a broadcaster. And they'll say, oh, no, you can do that part-time. I mean, if you have spare time, you can do that. But you should be an engineer. You should be pursuing the sciences. Because I was really good at that stuff. Was that the case with you? What happened?
So, again, in high school, I was top of my class. You know, I matriculated top of my matric class. And so I had the aptitude to do just about anything. And we had this teacher. I went to a girls-only high school. Very small, a convent, yes. So we had this teacher, Mrs. Tammer. And Mrs. Tammer was very wealthy. You know, I mean, she'd get like a car for Mother's Day. And all the girls wanted to be like Mrs. Tammer. So one day I said to her, Mrs. Tammer, what does your husband do for a living? Because I knew she wasn't the one bringing in the money. I think she only had 3 lessons a week, if even. And so she says, no, my husband is a chemical engineer. You know, he's got his own company. He makes, I think he made chemicals for swimming pools. And I said to her, okay, that's what I want to do. And her being the guidance teacher at school, she started helping me to become like her husband. And so we did the applications. I mean, I got a bursary, got accepted to VERDS, came through. And I realized in the program that I hated it. It was nothing like who I am. I'm a very people-oriented person. We had to do vacation work for our bursars, and I remember, our sponsors. And I remember my first job was at SAPI, and they put me in the effluent plant in a park home by myself with a computer, and I had to compile a training manual. The work I didn't mind, but the environment, I just did not see myself living like that for the rest of my life. And that's when I started confronting the reality of the wrong choice I had made. But you know, it takes time for you to accept and to make a U-turn, and it's also difficult to convince the parents that you made the wrong choice and you want to make a U-turn. But luckily,
after they've paid for varsity.
Well, I had a bursary, but for them it wasn't even that. It was time. You know, they had plans for their child. So in my second year only did they start entertaining the idea of my misery, because I was not happy. And my mom, being an educator, she had a bit of knowledge, so she took me to the Department of Labor. They used to offer free psychometric testing or consultations with an educational psychologist. So I did the whole battery of tests to get to see who isn't poor. And I also had a session with the educational psychologist, and she said to me, you're people-orientated, you need to work with people, you know, and so she gave me options. It was really across the health sciences. So I could have pursued anything from psychology to medicine. But, you know, when you have the aptitude, people always push you to the limit. And so, I didn't really, I was so indifferent at the time. I think I was young and I just wanted to study. I just wanted to tick that box.
That you did it.
Yes. And so, so I did allow the people around me to influence me, and they're like, well, do medicine. And I was like, fine, I'll do it. And I did it.
If only it was that simple for the rest of us to say, do medicine, one of the tough areas in terms of study. And it's fine, I'll do it. But in a strange twist as well, it was medicine the actual practice and the realities of medicine that would then lead you to politics, leading to you now being a candidate for mayor of Johannesburg. Tell me about that day. I don't have it, which is a great pity, because when I saw you telling that story of that picture at Alexandra Clinic and how it made you decide, actually, I'm jumping into politics.
So I worked a bit, you know, as a doctor. I worked for about 6 years in different settings. And the final job I did was, I was working for myself. I had contracts with SASSA, actually. I was doing disability assessments for SASSA in a very poor village in the Northwest province. Well, different villages, but this happened in Khanyisa, in the Northwest. That's where my transition started. So the Alex part was the second part of the transition. But I was in Khanyisa, and I'm supposed to be seeing people with disabilities and doing assessments as to whether or not they qualify for a SASSA disability grant. And I realized most of these people don't qualify. I would have a patient who says, my diabetes is uncontrolled. Can I get a disability grant? Or a woman saying, I've had 3 cesarean sections. Can I get a disability grant? So I started asking myself, what's going on here? And I realized there's poverty at play in a very underdeveloped part of South Africa. This is a place where you don't have any industrialization, nothing, you know. And so these people were limited to SASSA grants, and they had to make stuff up almost to get these grants. It broke my heart, and I started thinking, how do we help people more meaningfully? Because a lot of them were patients, and they were coming with their hospital files. But I was seeing that the uncontrolled diabetics also probably uncontrolled because they're not eating right. Chances are they're on insulin, they're not storing it correctly, they probably don't have electricity or, you know, and access to a fridge, for instance, and all of that. And so I started interacting in my mind with the social determinants of health, or social things that lead to ill health. And I wanted to be helpful to my patients beyond just giving them medication and having them come back. And so that's when I decided to come to Joburg. I moved to Joburg in 2011. The aim was to study for 4 years and leave. I did public health medicine at Wits. And immediately after doing my time, my first job was in Alex as a casualty officer. And being in Alex Township, I don't know if you've driven through Alex.
Yeah, I've been there, yeah.
So it's an experience. For someone like me who grew up in Mabopane, you know, Mabopane was under Mangope, under Bophuthatswana. It's a different type of township, very orderly, infrastructure is great. So being in Alex was, for me, depressing. But also the patients that were coming to me, their stories, because it would be a stabbing because someone was taking their phone. And I'd say, but why did they stab you? Why didn't they just, were you resisting? And they'll say, no, I was not resisting. And so I began to, again, connect the dots. What I'm seeing at the casualty with what's happening in Alexandra, how people are living.
Has social roots.
The social issues in the township.
Mpho Phalatse, unfortunately, very unfortunately, I'm completely out of time.
Wow.
Thank you for coming through and sharing your story with us. And I believe this is important because, you know, South Africans will get to know you a bit better as they engage with you and know your roots, right? And not call you those ugly names based on assumptions of where your background is. Now they know, and they can engage you on the content of your character. Mpho Phalatse is the DA mayoral candidate for the city of Joburg, and unfortunately I'm completely out of time, so we'll leave it there for the moment. I'm back at the top of the hour with more on the intel, and we're focusing on the state of the economy, investment, as well as issues of infrastructure development.